Otisville, Michigan, a small town where life moves as slowly as the ticking of an old clock. In a quiet house, there lived Andrea Eilber, a 20-year-old girl whose smile could light up the dullest aisle of the grocery store where she worked. She was gentle, diligent, and hopeful, a young woman on the edge of a bright future. She had a boyfriend, Kenneth, a shy 19-year-old who adored her deeply. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, perfectly safe. On the evening of November 14, 2011, Andrea sent a short text message. "I can't make it. Bring the DVDs instead." It sounded casual, ordinary. Even yet, no one knew it would be the last message she would ever send. When Kenneth arrived, the house was dark. The doors were locked. Her car was gone. In the quiet of that cold Michigan night, only the wind whispered through the trees, and it whispered that something was terribly wrong. 2 days later, police broke down the door. In the basement, Andrea sat motionless. In a chair, head tilted, a single gunshot wound to her temple. Her wrists bore the deep marks of zip ties, but the restraints were gone, as if the killer had returned to erase his own sin. When the police announced they had their suspect, the town exhaled in relief. But they didn't know the man they arrested wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, and the real killer would walk free for more than a decade. If this weren't a true story, you'd never believe it actually happened. In Otisville, a quiet town of only a few blocks where everyone knows each other, the disappearance of a girl like Andrea Eilber could never go unnoticed. Andrea was born in 1991 in Flint, Michigan. Her mother passed away when she was little, leaving behind a silence that followed her for years. Her father later remarried, and Andrea learned to rebuild her life with patience and grace. After high school, she started working at a local supermarket. Every morning she made coffee for her dad, greeted the neighbors, and went to work in her clean white sneakers. People remembered her as the girl with kind eyes who always seemed to be dreaming of a peaceful future. That's where she met Kenneth, a 19-year-old co-worker, shy, awkward, and kind. Their relationship blossomed slowly, quietly, the way young love often does, tender and hopeful, untouched by darkness. In November 2011, Andrea's aunt and uncle went out of town and asked her to house sit. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, just a few miles from downtown. She decided to stay there for a few days. Kenneth often came over. They'd watch movies, eat pizza, talk about Christmas plans. Friends said Andrea looked happy, relaxed, completely normal. Then came the night of November 14th. Kenneth was supposed to pick her up around 7, but just before he left, he got a text, "I can't come. Bring some movie DVDs instead." It was short, oddly cold for someone who usually added heart emojis to her messages. Kenneth thought it was strange, but he went anyway. He arrived around 7:30. The house was pitch dark. No lights, no car, no sound. He called, texted, knocked, nothing. Finally, he sat in his car watching the silent house, waiting. 30 minutes later, another text came in. Plans changed. See you tomorrow. It was calm. Too calm. Kenneth didn't know it yet, but that message was the last desperate echo of a life already slipping away. The next day, Kenneth waited. No calls, no replies. He figured she was upset, maybe needed space. But when Andrea's father couldn't reach her either, the unease began to grow. By the following evening, fear replaced reason. Family and friends divided into search groups, driving through nearby towns, gas stations, and parks, hoping to find a sign of her. That night, one of Andrea's friends spotted her silver Chevy Malibu, parked deep inside a wooded area near a national park in Davison. The doors were unlocked. The keys were missing. Andrea was gone. Her father called the police immediately. Officers arrived at her aunt and uncle's house, and with permission, forced the door open. Upstairs, nothing. But when one of them walked down into the basement, the flashlight froze on something that made his blood run cold. Andrea sat on a chair, her head slumped to one side, a single gunshot wound in her temple. The faint smell of gunpowder still lingered. Her wrists showed marked zip ties that had been cut. Forensic experts later determined the restraints had been removed 6 to 7 hours after her death, meaning the killer either returned later or stayed in the house all night, watching her lifeless body. There was no sign of forced entry, and what was missing made no sense. A bottle of perfume, a sweater, a camera, 3 knives, a rifle, some bullets, and a small amount of cash. Jewelry, gold, and even her phone were untouched. This wasn't a robbery. It was something colder, more deliberate, a crime wrapped in calculation. When detectives reviewed Andrea's life, only one person seemed close enough, emotional enough to have a reason: her boyfriend, Kenneth. Louise's voice turns low, deliberate. When a kind girl dies inside a locked house, suspicion always falls on the one who loved her most. Because in love, the line between tenderness and destruction is often just one wrong heartbeat. When police arrived at the scene of Andrea Eilber's murder, every glance turned toward one person: Kenneth. He was the last person to have plans with her, the one who showed up that night. And in the eyes of investigators, he had both motive and opportunity. And maybe most importantly, Kenneth was young, naive, the kind of suspect who might crack under pressure. From the very beginning, Kenneth cooperated completely. He gave officers his DNA fingerprints, the clothes he wore on November 14th, and even agreed to take a polygraph test. He didn't hire a lawyer, didn't hesitate, didn't hide. Sitting in the interrogation room, Kenneth explained everything: how he had waited outside the house for 30 minutes, how Andrea texted that her plans had changed, how he eventually drove away. But the detectives didn't see honesty. They saw opportunity. They asked the same questions over and over. Why didn't you go inside? Why didn't you call the police when she disappeared? Every answer only deepened their suspicion. They needed a killer, and a boyfriend, suddenly rejected, was the perfect fit for their story. Soon they began collecting inconsistencies. Kenneth admitted he'd sat in his car outside Andrea's house for half an hour, a time frame that, according to forensics, matched the estimated time of death. He had given the wrong address to a friend who was helping search for Andrea, and he didn't join the search the next day, saying he had to work early. To investigators, it was enough to paint guilt. But the truth told a very different story. Phone records revealed that after Kenneth left Andrea's house around 9:40 p.m., his phone connected to a tower near a gas station between there and another town. Surveillance footage showed him at the station, calm, alone, buying snacks. Around 10 o'clock, Kenneth was seen at a female friend's apartment, where 2 witnesses confirmed he stayed until midnight, watching a movie. At almost the exact same time, just 7 minutes after he arrived there, someone withdrew $300 from Andrea's ATM card in Davison, a town nearly 30 miles away. He couldn't possibly have been in both places. The evidence should have cleared him. Instead, detectives ignored it. The investigation had already chosen its villain. The next morning, Kenneth tried calling Andrea again. No answer. He drove back to the house around 10 a.m. Knocked, waited. No sound. He left around 11, just as another withdrawal of $300 appeared from Andrea's bank account in yet another town even farther away. Security footage showed a man driving a white pickup truck using her card. Not Kenneth. Not even close. Still, the detectives refused to let go. To them, logic mattered less than closure. If it wasn't Kenneth, who else could it be? After 10 hours of relentless interrogation, Kenneth was exhausted, dehydrated, emotionally crushed. One detective slid a sheet of paper across the table. "Just write down what happened when you found her," he said. "Say she was already dead. Say you tried to cover it up. Then you can go home." Kenneth, desperate to end the nightmare, wrote a few shaky lines that he had found Andrea's body and, afraid her family would think she took her own life, tried to stage it as a murder. When he signed, the detective smiled. "Congratulations," he said. "You just confessed to murder." Kenneth froze. He begged to retract his statement, but it was too late. That vague, exhausted note became the cornerstone of the case against him. What made it worse, his lawyer was right outside the station. Kenneth's grandfather had hired one and to send him immediately. But officers refused to reveal Kenneth's location, even hung up when the lawyer called. For 12 hours, Kenneth sat inside alone, unaware that help was knocking at the door. The next morning, police announced they had their killer. The town sighed in relief. And Kenneth, once the shy boy in love, was paraded before cameras as the jealous boyfriend who murdered his girlfriend. Louise's voice turns cold, deliberate. Police needed a killer. And when they couldn't find the real one, they built one. Because sometimes justice doesn't care about the truth. It just needs someone to blame. May 2015. 4 years had passed since Andrea's death when the trial of Kenneth finally began. Inside the Genesee County courtroom, the air was thick with tension and bias. Local news outlets had already branded it the cold-hearted boyfriend murder case. And the prosecutor opened with a line that would echo in every headline. This is the story of a boy who couldn't handle rejection and decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. No DNA matched. No witnesses existed. All they had were 2 fragile pieces of evidence, a coerced confession, and a single strand of bloody hair. In court, the prosecution played snippets of Kenneth's interrogation video, stopping exactly at the line where he said, "I saw her ceasing there." They paused, letting silence do the rest, and told the jury, that's his admission of guilt. The parts where Kenneth said, "I didn't do anything," or "you're pressuring me," those sections had conveniently gone missing due to what police called a technical malfunction. The defense protested, arguing that Kenneth had been exhausted, dehydrated, and denied legal counsel, but the court shrugged it off. "No one forced him to sign," the prosecutor said. "But anyone who's ever been broken down for 10 hours under relentless questioning knows a desperate mind will say anything just to go home." An officer testified that he had found a single bloody hair on Kenneth's pants from the night Andrea disappeared. At first glance, it seemed damning physical proof. But the forensic report told a different story. There was no other trace of blood on the pants. Not a droplet. Not a microscopic speck. If Kenneth had been wearing them during the shooting, blood spatter would have been unavoidable. The forensic analyst concluded that the hair must have landed on the pants hours after Andrea's death, likely through contamination. After all, police had seized Kenneth's clothing just 30 minutes after discovering the body, when officers were still covered in trace evidence from the crime scene. Yet the prosecution dismissed the science, holding the hair up before the jury and saying, "You don't need to be a scientist to see what's in front of you." And the jurors, ordinary people untrained in forensics, believed what they could see. DNA found under Andrea's fingernails didn't match Kenneth. The DNA inside her car didn't match either. Her father testified that the car leaked oil, leaving stains on the driver's shoes, and Kenneth's boots had none. But those inconsistencies were swept aside. The prosecutor presented a new narrative. Kenneth killed Andrea out of jealousy, then staged a fake robbery to cover it up. When asked about motive, he simply said, "You don't need a motive when a heart is broken." He ended his argument by showing 2 photos side by side, Andrea smiling radiant and Kenneth in his jail uniform, expressionless. The contrast did the rest. The jury didn't need science. They had emotion. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty of first-degree murder. Life in prison without parole. Kenneth's father collapsed. His mother sobbed uncontrollably. Kenneth stood silent, blank-eyed, as if watching his life drift away from behind glass. Outside the courthouse, people clapped. Reporters shouted. No one heard the forensic expert whisper, "The DNA doesn't match." Justice had made up its mind. And with that verdict, the door to the truth slammed shut. Kenneth served 3 years in prison, then another 4 under strict house arrest. In 2018, his attorney discovered a clerical error in the jury paperwork. For the charge of second-degree murder, there was only one checkbox: guilty. No option for not guilty. The appeals court couldn't ignore it. Kenneth was granted a new trial. For the first time, a flicker of light cut through the darkness. But no one yet knew that it would take 11 more years and a strand of DNA to finally uncover the truth. Louis's voice low and steady. Sometimes justice doesn't fail, it simply falls asleep. The tragedy is when it finally wakes up. Too many innocent lives have already been lost in its dreams. Time moved slowly like a sentence without an end. 11 years had passed since that November night when Andrea Eilber was murdered, and Kenneth still lived in limbo, half free, half imprisoned. He wore an electronic ankle monitor, confined by invisible walls, and every step was a reminder that freedom was just another kind of cage. The media had moved on. The police stayed silent. But his attorney refused to let the story die. He believed that only science, the kind that doesn't lie, could set Kenneth free. In 2022, after years of petitions, the defense finally convinced authorities to reopen the DNA evidence. Technology had advanced. New sequencing methods could now analyze genetic fragments far smaller than before. Forensic experts revisited every trace the skin cells found beneath Andrea's fingernails, a strand of hair, and a cigarette butt discovered near the porch. The results were astonishing. All 3 contained the same unknown male DNA profile. It didn't match Kenneth or anyone in the FBI database. So investigators reached out to a company called Othram Specialists in Forensic Genetic Genealogy to track the suspect through family DNA connections. That's when the case, long buried in dust, began to breathe again. In January 2023, Othram's analysts traced the DNA to a 42-year-old man named Chadwick Mowley. Back in 2011, he had lived just 40 minutes from Otisville. His record was stained with petty theft, alcohol abuse, and violence, but nothing as brutal as murder. Detectives pulled his old phone records and found something chilling. On the night Andrea was killed, Chadwick's phone pinged 23 times from a cell tower near her aunt and uncle's house. Not once, not twice, 23 times. The pattern was undeniable. By the time police tracked him down, Chadwick was living in Utah, working odd delivery jobs and sleeping in a silver van. He kept to himself, quiet, isolated, unpredictable. For 2 months, officers shadowed him, trying to collect discarded items for DNA. But Chadwick was careful. He left nothing behind. Finally, they decided to confront him head-on. One winter morning, officers approached his van with a warrant and asked for a sample. Chadwick gave a weary smirk. "I don't even know anyone named Andrea," he said. 2 weeks later, the lab results came back, and the truth was undeniable. Chadwick's DNA matched the skin under Andrea's fingernails, the cigarette butt outside the house, and the samples found inside her car. Then came the final nail in the coffin inside his van. Police found a revolver. Ballistics confirmed it was the very weapon used to kill Andrea. When Chadwick realized what they had, he ran. He drove north through fields, mountains, and frozen highways all the way to Montana, near the Canadian border. He was captured without resistance. But on the way back while being transported to the airport, he escaped, freeing himself from both handcuffs and leg irons, disappearing into the forest. 3 days later, a sheriff spotted a man paddling down a river in a canoe, his face, pale eyes empty. It was Chadwick. When they surrounded him, he didn't fight. He simply said, "I guess you already know everything." In court, Chadwick claimed he had been drunk that night and couldn't remember what happened. He entered a no contest plea, not admitting guilt, but not denying it either. The court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. But for Kenneth, freedom still didn't come. Even after Chadwick's conviction, prosecutors insisted they would retry Kenneth, suggesting that both men may have been involved. It was absurd. Chadwick had said he'd never met Kenneth or Andrea. Yet the system that once imprisoned an innocent man, couldn't bear to admit it, had been wrong. Kenneth remained at home under surveillance, trapped in silence, a man acquitted by DCFA but still imprisoned by Pruitt. Science found the killer. But justice couldn't find the courage to say, "We were wrong." Because sometimes the truth isn't feared for what it reveals, it's feared for what it proves. Nearly 14 years have passed since that night. The house Andrea Eilber was watching for her aunt and uncle has been repainted. The basement sealed off. But for the people of Otisville, that place still hums with unease, a reminder of a girl taken too soon, and a justice system that lost its way. And Kenneth, once branded the cold-hearted boyfriend, now lives quietly, almost invisibly. The ankle monitor he still wears is no longer a device of control, but a scar made of metal and memory, a symbol of everything stolen from him: his youth, his name, his faith in fairness. When Chadwick Mowley was finally sentenced to life in prison, Kenneth didn't attend the hearing. But his lawyer said that when he heard the news, Kenneth simply sat still for a long time, then whispered, "At least she can rest now. I still can't." Luis's voice slows, heavy with reflection. In this story, there are two victims, one who lost her life and one who lost his. But only one killer and one system that let him walk free for more than a decade. Chadwick confessed. The police admitted their mistakes. But Kenneth remains under supervision, as if justice fears its own shadow. His attorney once said, he doesn't need forgiveness. He needs back the years that were stolen from him. The screen fades to black, leaving only Luis's voice, soft, steady, unrelenting. Andrea is gone. Chadwick will die in prison. But Kenneth is still waiting to be free. Maybe the greatest crime isn't murder itself, but the refusal to admit we were wrong. If you believe justice deserves a second look, share this story. Because sometimes the only thing standing between truth and tragedy is someone willing to listen.